Why was everyone backing away? Why did every voice around her sound like it had already given up? The collapsed building looked like a war zone. Smoke and dust mixed with the afternoon heat, turning the air into a gritty haze that burned her lungs. Sirens wailed somewhere beyond the wreckage, a chorus of chaos that never quite faded. Concrete slabs jutted from the rubble like broken bones, and beneath one of them lay a man who wasn't supposed to be dead yet. "Stop, he's already dead." The fire chief's voice cut through the noise, sharp and final. His words hit harder than the sound of metal twisting in the debris. But Sarah Martinez didn't move. She stayed on her knees beside the body, her gloved hands pressing hard into a chest that no longer rose. Sweat streaked her soot-stained face. Her breaths came fast and shallow, but her rhythm stayed steady. 1, 2, 3, compress. 1, 2, 3. 12 minutes. That was what they were telling her. 12 minutes without a pulse. 12 minutes without a breath. In civilian medicine, that was eternity. In her world, it wasn't over until you had nothing left to try. Around her, the rescue team shifted uneasily, waiting for her to stop. She could feel their eyes on her, the same look she used to see on new medics during her combat tour in Afghanistan. The look that said she doesn't know when to quit. They didn't know. They couldn't. Not about Kandahar, not about the tent hospital where time bent differently. Not about the things she'd done to keep soldiers breathing when there was no heartbeat left to chase. "Martinez," Chief Harrison called again, his boots crunching over broken glass. "We've got other victims. You need to call it." She looked up, her eyes fierce through the dust. "Give me 3 more minutes." He hesitated. The tone in her voice, low, commanding, wasn't something he heard often outside of the military. It made him pause, even as the seconds bled away. Jake Rodriguez, her EMT partner for 2 years, knelt beside her. His face was lined with exhaustion and disbelief. "Sarah, he's gone. There's no point." Her hands didn't stop. "There's always a point," she muttered. She checked the man's carotid artery again. Nothing. Skin waxy, lips blue. Marcus Chen, 28 years old. Husband, father of twin girls. Buried under concrete that had stopped his heartbeat and crushed his lungs. By every medical standard, he was gone. By hers, he was unfinished. Sarah studied his body, the angle of the collapse, the faint discoloration on his neck, details others ignored. In Afghanistan, she'd learned that death didn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it lingered just out of reach, waiting for the right hands to pull it back. 3 minutes, Harrison grumbled. "Then we move on." She didn't answer. She shifted her palms, positioning them slightly lower than the standard CPR point, angled toward the ribs, thumbs pressing into 2 precise nerve clusters. The movement was subtle, almost instinctive. A memory flickered behind her eyes, a forward operating base, the smell of gunpowder, a young soldier bleeding out on a dirt floor. A voice from her past, calm and gravel rough. "When the heart stops, listen for what's left." Sometimes the body whispers before it screams. That voice had belonged to Sergeant Morgan, the Special Forces medic who taught her a technique she was never supposed to use outside classified operations. They'd called it battlefield resuscitation, but the soldiers whispered another name: resurrection medicine. It wasn't magic. It was science stretched to its breaking point, built from equal parts intuition and defiance. She used it only twice. Both times the patients had lived when no one else believed they could. Now here, amid the wreckage of a Phoenix construction site, Sarah closed her eyes and summoned the muscle memory of those nights under red tactical light. Her fingers moved like she was playing a silent instrument. Each press followed a rhythm not found in any medical manual, compressions mapped to the body's hidden circuitry. She applied pressure, paused, angled her hands again, a dance between hope and futility. "What is she doing?" a firefighter whispered. Sarah heard him but didn't look up. Her heartbeat matched the tempo of her hands. "Find the nerve cluster. Stimulate the pathway. Don't let doubt in." Jake shifted uneasily beside her. Sarah, this isn't. I learned it in the army, she said without breaking rhythm. Sometimes the textbook isn't enough. The words silenced him. Phase 1, stimulate the vagus nerve. Restart communication between the brainstem and heart. Phase 2, compress in microbursts, forcing mechanical movement through electrical silence. Phase 3, wait for a sign. Dust drifted through the light. Seconds stretched. The sound of generators and shouting faded into a dull hum. Every person nearby, firefighters, medics, even survivors on stretchers, had stopped to watch. It was madness. That's what they saw, a paramedic clinging to a corpse. But Sarah wasn't praying. She was fighting, quietly, methodically, with the kind of focus that burned. Her hands paused, something beneath her fingertips, a twitch, so faint it could have been muscle reflex, or memory, or the beginning of something impossible. Her pulse quickened. "Come on," she whispered, "come back." Harrison checked his watch again. 16 minutes. He opened his mouth to call it, then froze. Sarah leaned closer. The air shifted. A faint hiss escaped Marcus's lips, too controlled to be random. She dropped her ear to his chest. A sound almost imperceptible, a flutter. "Jake," she said, barely audible, "get the advanced monitor from the truck, now." He hesitated. "Sarah." "Now." Jake sprinted through the dust. Sarah kept working, her hands steady, her breathing sharp and deliberate. She didn't dare stop, not when the ghost of a heartbeat whispered beneath her palms. Jake returned, fumbling with the monitor leads. Sarah guided him wordlessly. When the screen lit up, the data flashed, weak and irregular but alive. Electrical activity. Faint, fragile, real. "Jesus Christ," Harrison murmured. "That can't be right." Sarah didn't look up. "Get me epinephrine." Someone handed her the syringe. She didn't wait for consent, just plunged it into the chest and resumed compressions, this time aligned to mimic the heart's natural rhythm. The monitor beeped again, then again. The beep steadied. A low gasp escaped the man's throat. His body jerked. Eyes flickered open for less than a second, unfocused, then fell shut again. "He's breathing," Jake said, all breaking through exhaustion. "He's actually—" "Don't stop bagging," Sarah ordered, her voice breaking on the edge of disbelief. "We've got him." The crowd erupted in whispers. Some backed away like they'd witnessed witchcraft. Others stood frozen, trying to understand what they'd just seen. The man who'd been dead for 20 minutes was breathing again. Chief Harrison removed his helmet, staring at Marcus as if trying to rewrite the rules of reality. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Even if you shocked him, he'd have brain damage." Sarah finally sat back, her arms trembling. "Sometimes the body needs a reason to come back," she said softly. "You just have to remind it." As they loaded Marcus onto the stretcher, Jake caught her arm. "What the hell was that, Sarah? That was CPR. That was something else." She met his eyes. "It's something I was taught to use when there's nothing left to lose." They lifted Marcus into the ambulance. Sarah climbed in beside him, placing a hand over the pulse she had coaxed back from silence. It was weak, but it was there. The oxygen mask fogged with each breath he took. As they drove, sirens screaming through traffic, Sarah stared at the monitor's steady blips. Her thoughts drifted backward again, to the desert, to the field hospital where she'd first learned the line between science and faith was thinner than most dared to admit. Her radio crackled. Dispatch updates about more survivors, more bodies. The disaster wasn't done with them yet. Marcus stirred weakly, eyes half open, unfocused. "Don't try to speak," she whispered. "Just breathe." He tried anyway, his lips forming a word she barely caught. "Why?" "Because no one else would," she thought. "Because I've seen what giving up looks like. Because I still hear the ones I couldn't save." She didn't say it aloud. When they reached Phoenix General, the emergency bay was chaos. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the attending physician, met them at the doors. 23 minutes down," she repeated, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "That's not Sarah, that's not possible." Sarah gave a tired smile. "Tell that to him." Inside the trauma bay, monitors beeped in syncopated rhythm. Marcus's pupils responded to light. His fingers twitched when asked to squeeze. Dr. Walsh examined him, muttering, "There's no hypoxia, no motor deficit. This shouldn't, this can't." But it did. Sarah stepped back, exhaustion catching up to her. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear, but from the come-down, the same crash she used to feel after a medevac save in Afghanistan. The adrenaline fades, and all that's left is silence. A nurse approached her quietly. "He's asking for you." She walked to the bedside. Marcus's voice was weak but clear. "You didn't give up on me." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's my job." He blinked, tears welling. "I heard them say I was gone, I heard it all, but I couldn't move. I thought I'd never see my girls again." For a moment, the chaos of the ER disappeared. Just two people suspended between life and the memory of death. Then her radio cracked again, Chief Harrison's voice, tight with urgency. "All units, Sector 7 just collapsed. Multiple victims, possible entrapment." Dr. Walsh met her eyes. "Go," she said. "Whatever you did out there, someone else might need it." Sarah nodded, already moving. The exhaustion vanished beneath a wave of focus. Jake jogged to catch up as they ran back toward the ambulance. "You think it'll work again?" She climbed into the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the skyline where smoke rose anew. "I don't know," she said, "but I'm going to try." The engine roared to life. And as the sirens rose again, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, one question burned beneath the noise, the same one she'd carried since Afghanistan. When everyone else walks away, how do you know when to stop trying? How do you tell when a life is truly gone? The question haunted Sarah as the ambulance tore through downtown Phoenix, sirens slicing through the thick desert heat. Dust still clung to her uniform, her gloves streaked with the dried grit of concrete and blood. Every turn of the wheels echoed with the same pulse she had fought to restore minutes earlier, a rhythm that still played beneath her skin. Jake sat beside her, quiet for once. His usual chatter was gone, replaced by something heavier. He stared at the dash, jaw tight, as if afraid to say what both of them were thinking. "You shouldn't have been able to do that," he finally said. Sarah didn't answer right away. The city lights flickered past, reflected in the windshield like ghosts. "I shouldn't," she admitted, "but I did." At the disaster site, the night had fallen fast. Portable lights threw harsh white beams across piles of shattered concrete and twisted steel. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and diesel. Fire crews moved methodically, shouting over the noise of generators. Somewhere in that chaos, someone else was trapped, maybe still breathing, maybe not. When they arrived, Chief Harrison was waiting near the command tent, his radio pressed to his ear. The look on his face told her everything before he spoke. "She's been down 18 minutes, he said. "No pulse. We can't reach her airway, not fully, same as before." Sarah followed him toward the collapsed section of a parking structure. Rescue workers were kneeling around a middle-aged woman pinned beneath a concrete slab. Her ID badge, streaked with dust, read Alina Vasquez, Lincoln Elementary School. A teacher. She was helping evacuate kids, one firefighter said quietly. Never made it out. Sarah dropped to her knees beside Alina, assessing. No rise and fall of the chest. No pulse at the carotid. Her skin already cooling. It was the same scene, the same odds, the same stares from the people who'd seen her pull off the impossible once. Except now those stares weren't skeptical, they were expectant. "Can you do it again?" a young EMT asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at him, saw the hope behind the question, and felt its weight settle in her chest. "I don't know," she said, "but I'm going to try." Jake crouched beside her again, this time without protest. "What do you need?" "Quiet," she said simply. The murmurs around them faded. The lights flickered in the swirling dust, throwing long shadows across the wreckage. Somewhere nearby, machinery groaned as rescuers worked to stabilize the beam pinning Alina down. But in Sarah's mind, the noise disappeared. It was just her, the woman beneath her hands, and the fragile line between what was gone and what might still return. She started the sequence. Thumb pressure at the lower sternum, rotational compressions along the rib plane, deep pulse mapping at nerve clusters most doctors never considered. She could feel the vibration of muscle memory, the echo of training she hadn't spoken of in years. In Afghanistan, she once told a dying corporal, "If your heart wants to fight, I'll find a way to help it remember." Now she whispered the same under her breath, "Remember." But this time was different. The body felt heavier, more distant. The feedback beneath her palms wasn't the same faint resistance she'd felt with Marcus Chen. It was flat, empty. 15 minutes. Her arms ached. Sweat burned her eyes. The clock inside her head kept ticking down, each second another reminder of how long a human brain could go without oxygen. She tried adjusting the pattern, shifting pressure points, changing the rhythm, anything to find the response she'd found before. Nothing. The silence stretched long enough for the doubt to creep in. Then from behind her, a voice, Harrison's, low and careful. "You've done everything you can, Martinez." Sarah kept working. Her hands didn't know how to stop. "Not yet." "Sarah," Jake said softly, "if she's gone." Her jaw tightened. "You don't decide that, not yet." Her motion slowed, then stopped. The body beneath her remained still. She placed 2 fingers on the carotid artery one final time. Nothing. No spark, no flutter. Sarah sat back on her heels, the sound of her own breathing filling the space where hope had been. Around her, the circle of rescuers stood in heavy silence. No one spoke. The light caught the side of Alina's face, calm now, dust covering her eyelashes like frost. Sarah exhaled slowly, voice breaking as she said, "Time of death, 9:43 p.m. The words tasted like ash. For a moment, no one moved. Then Chief Harrison knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You tried. That's more than most would have done." But she didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Alina's face. She'd saved one life and lost another. That was the math of medicine, brutal, simple, merciless, but it never balanced out. As they covered the woman's body, Sarah rose, her legs unsteady. The young EMT who'd asked the question earlier looked crushed. "I thought you could do it," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "So did I," she whispered. Behind them, floodlights buzzed, and camera flashes cut through the dark. A news van had pulled up near the perimeter, reporters spilling out with microphones and cameras already rolling. Someone had leaked word about the miracle paramedic. "Martinez," a reporter called out, "is it true you brought a man back from the dead today? Can you tell us how you did it?" Sarah didn't answer. She brushed past them, walking toward her ambulance with a pace that made people step aside. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of seeing cameras where there should have been hands. Tired of the way the world turned survival into spectacle. Jake followed, still silent, until they reached the rig. Only when the doors shut behind them did he speak. "They're going to want answers." "Let them ask," she said, staring at her blood-streaked gloves. "Doesn't mean they'll understand." They rode back in silence, the sirens off now, the city eerily calm in the aftershock of disaster. Jake watched her from the passenger seat, brow furrowed. "That technique," he said finally. "You said you learned it in the army. They teach that to everyone." Sarah shook her head. "No, it was a special program, classified. I was deployed with a unit that tested advanced trauma resuscitation methods. Some worked, some didn't." "And that thing you do?" "It's not a thing," she said quietly. "It's instinct, guided by training. It's reading what others can't see." Jake leaned back, frowning. "You really think you can teach that?" She looked out the window, watching the reflection of red and blue lights slide across the glass. "That's the problem," she murmured. I'm not sure it can be. When they reached the hospital, Marcus Chen was still alive. More than alive, awake, responsive, talking softly with his wife in the corner of the trauma unit. Sarah stopped at the door, watching them through the glass. The woman's hands were wrapped around his. Their twins, no more than 5, clung to the edge of the hospital bed, eyes wide and disbelieving. Marcus noticed her in the doorway and mouthed, "Thank you." She nodded once, a faint smile crossing her face, then faded when she turned away. The hallway light cast long shadows as she walked, the sound of monitors and footsteps fading behind her. Dr. Walsh intercepted her near the nurse's station. "Martinez," she said, her tone brisk but curious. "Whatever you did out there, the results don't make sense. He has no neurological deficits. His MRI is clean. That shouldn't be possible after 20 minutes down." Sarah rubbed her face, exhaustion dragging at every word. "I told you, the technique isn't exactly standard." "I don't need standard," Dr. Walsh said. "I need reproducible. If it can save people, it needs to be studied, documented." Sarah met her gaze. "And if people try it and fail, if they hurt someone because they don't know the limits?" The doctor hesitated. "Then we train them." Sarah shook her head slowly. "You can't train instinct. You can't write intuition into a manual." Before Walsh could respond, a commotion rose from the hallway, Marcus's wife rushing forward, tears streaming as she embraced Sarah. The woman's grip was fierce, trembling. "Thank you," she whispered over and over. "They told me you wouldn't give up. Everyone else said they already called him gone." Sarah held her awkwardly, her heart torn between pride and guilt. "He fought his way back," she said softly. "All I did was listen." Behind them, Dr. Walsh watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The scientist in her wanted data, patterns, proof. The human part of her saw something else, conviction that didn't need explanation. Later that night, when the corridors quieted and the media had been escorted away, Sarah sat alone in the ambulance bay. The lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of idling engines filled the silence. She leaned back against the wall, staring up at the desert sky where faint stars pierced through the city's haze. Jake joined her, coffee in hand. He passed one to her without a word. "How are you holding up?" he asked finally. She gave a small laugh. "You ever notice how that question never actually wants an answer?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm asking anyway." She took a sip, eyes still on the sky. "I'm thinking about how thin the line is, between living and dying, between trying and giving up, between being right and being reckless." "You saved a man who was clinically dead," Jake said. "You weren't reckless." She shook her head. "And I lost a woman who wasn't supposed to die. Both are true. And that's the part no one tells you, how both can live in your chest at the same time." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed quietly around them, distant traffic, the faint wail of another siren somewhere out there, someone else's emergency. Jake looked over at her. "You think they'll make you explain it, the technique?" "Of course," she said, her tone almost tiredly amused. "They'll ask for reports, panels, conferences. Everyone wants to understand a miracle." He nodded. "And will you tell them?" Sarah turned the coffee cup in her hands. The liquid inside rippled with the soft vibration of nearby engines. "Some knowledge isn't meant for everyone," she said at last. "Not because it's secret, because it's heavy. You can teach someone how to restart a heart, but not how to live with the ones you couldn't." Jake didn't reply. He didn't need to. The night pressed closer, warm and quiet. The city had lost too much that day. But somewhere inside the hospital, a man was alive, breathing, laughing, talking to his children, because one woman refused to stop when everyone else already had. Sarah watched the horizon where faint light hinted at dawn. She thought of Kandahar again, of the medics who never came home, of the techniques whispered between them like confessions, of the lessons burned into her bones. And as the first streak of sunrise broke through the smoke, she realized the hardest truth of all. Sometimes saving one life means carrying the weight of every other you couldn't. When the questions finally came, they didn't arrive like an ambush. They arrived like paperwork. 3 days after the collapse, Phoenix General had mostly returned to normal rhythm. The halls smelled of antiseptic and burned coffee again instead of smoke and dust. But beneath that calm, there was a different kind of tension, the kind that came when medicine couldn't explain what had happened. Sarah felt it the moment she walked through the staff entrance. Conversations went quiet when she passed. Heads turned, then looked away. Whispers followed her down corridors like echoes of the siren that had carried Marcus Chen to the ER. Some called her a miracle worker. Others said she'd been reckless. Either way, everyone had an opinion. Dr. Jennifer Walsh caught up with her near the trauma bay. The doctor looked like she hadn't slept much. Dark circles, hair pulled into a loose bun, lab coat half-buttoned. She held a clipboard full of charts, but her eyes were on Sarah, measuring her carefully. "Morning," Sarah said, though it came out more like a question. "Conference room 4, Walsh replied. "You've been requested." That word, requested, felt too polite, like being invited to your own interrogation. When Sarah stepped into the room, a panel of faces turned toward her. Hospital administrators, EMS supervisors, 2 cardiologists she barely knew, and Chief Harrison, still in his fire department uniform. A coffee pot steamed in the corner. Someone had tried to make the setting feel casual, but the atmosphere was anything but. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the hospital's chief of cardiology, began. "Sarah, we appreciate you coming. We've reviewed all available data from the rescue scene and from Mr. Chen's treatment. Frankly, the results don't align with established medical science." Sarah took a slow breath. "I'm aware." Walsh leaned forward. "We're not questioning your integrity. We're trying to understand how. By all measurable standards, Marcus Chen should have suffered irreversible brain damage. Yet his MRI and neurological tests are pristine." Chief Harrison cleared his throat. "She's not lying about what she did. I saw it. We all did." Dr. Morrison nodded. "We don't doubt that. We're asking what exactly she did." For a moment, no one spoke. Sarah looked at the table, a polished surface reflecting the harsh ceiling lights, and saw her own hands trembling slightly. Those same hands had held life where there shouldn't have been any. Now they looked like evidence. "The technique," she began, voice steady but soft, "was developed during my deployment in Afghanistan. It combined unconventional pressure point stimulation with advanced cardiac pathway manipulation. It's not standard, and it's not something that can be applied blindly." Dr. Morrison frowned. "Pressure point stimulation, that sounds unscientific." Sarah met her eyes. "So does coming back from the dead." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room, quickly fading. She continued, "The premise is simple. The human heart isn't just an organ. It's an electrical network influenced by the nervous system. If you can restart communication through certain nerve clusters, you might trigger a restart even after prolonged asystole." Dr. Walsh folded her arms. "So, neuromodulation through manual stimulation." "Exactly, but it's not something you can just teach. It requires instinct. You have to read the tissue feedback, know when to push, when to stop." Harrison leaned forward, "And it worked." Sarah nodded. "Once, the same day it failed on another victim." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Walsh broke it gently. "Tell us about that." "Elena Vasquez," Sarah said. "Pinned under concrete, 18 minutes down. I tried the same protocol. It didn't work." Morrison scribbled something on her notepad. "So, not reproducible." Sarah sighed. "Not consistently. Every case is different." "Then it's anecdotal," Morrison concluded. Harrison's voice hardened. "With respect, doctor, it was a man alive who wasn't supposed to be. That's not anecdotal to his family." Walsh shot him a warning glance but didn't disagree. "We're not here to dismiss her results. We're here to assess whether this technique should be further studied or prohibited until it's better understood. Prohibited, the word landed like a stone. Sarah straightened. With all due respect, you can't prohibit what already exists. It's knowledge. The only question is who carries it responsibly. The administrator at the far end of the table, a gray-haired man named Lowell, cleared his throat. We're also facing a public relations challenge. The press is calling you the miracle paramedic. They're requesting interviews. We've had media outside the hospital gates since yesterday. I don't want interviews, Sarah said. Good, Lowell replied. Because the hospital's legal team would rather you not speak publicly at all until we review the liability implications. Liability, another cold word dressed in policy. Sarah leaned back, a bitter smile ghosting across her lips. You're worried I might save someone the wrong way. Morrison's pen paused mid-note. We're worried that unverified procedures, if copied by others, could cause harm. That was fair. It was also the problem she'd been trying to avoid since that day in the rubble. How do you share something that can save lives but also destroy careers, or worse, lives in the wrong hands? The meeting dragged on another hour. Questions, hypotheticals, data requests. She answered what she could, sidestepped what she couldn't. By the time she stepped outside, the hallway light felt too bright. Her head pounded with the echo of polite skepticism. Jake was waiting by the elevators, holding 2 coffees. Survived the firing squad. Barely, she muttered. He handed her a cup. They're scared. You did something they can't label. That's the worst thing you can do to bureaucrats. Sarah chuckled softly. You think they'll let it go? Not a chance, he said, but neither will you. He was right. She couldn't let it go. Not because of pride, but because Marcus Chen was alive, and that meant something beyond paperwork. She spent the next few nights in her small apartment near the hospital, unable to sleep. The TV played muted news loops showing footage from the disaster site. The anchors spoke her name with tones of awe and suspicion. The paramedic who defied death, Phoenix's miracle medic. She hated every headline. She'd seen what miracles really looked like. They weren't glorious. They were messy, desperate, born of instinct and fear and the refusal to quit. And sometimes they ended in silence, like Alina Vasquez's final stillness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Walsh. Meeting with EMS board postponed. Get some rest. She set the phone down and stared at the city through her window. Phoenix glittered, alive, restless. Somewhere out there, ambulances moved through the night, answering calls that would decide who saw morning. Sarah's reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered. Maybe it was the sleeplessness, maybe the weight of the unspoken. The technique she'd used, the one she'd sworn she'd never use again after Afghanistan, was supposed to stay buried. She'd broken that vow, and now the world wanted to unearth it. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams, not of Phoenix but of the desert, the roar of rotor blades, the copper smell of blood on sand, a soldier gasping as she pressed her hands into his chest, whispering, "Stay with me." The same rhythm, the same battle, different war. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. By mid-morning, the next call came, not from the hospital, but from a number she didn't recognize. Martinez. The voice was calm, official. This is Captain Lewis from the Department of Defense Medical Research Division. We've been briefed on your recent field success. Sarah froze. Field success? Yes, ma'am. The resuscitation protocol. We'd like to discuss your training background and the potential application for advanced disaster response programs. She hesitated. How did you even? The military keeps track of its own, the captain said lightly. You were part of Operation Phoenix Shield, correct? That name hit like a punch. Few even knew it existed. The classified trauma unit she joined during her 3rd tour. The experimental techniques, the secret reports filed under non-disclosure. How much do you know? She asked quietly. Enough to know what you did in Kandahar wasn't an accident, Lewis said. We think it's time to bring that knowledge into the light, responsibly, of course. Responsibly, another word that carried its own warning. He continued, we're developing a civilian military medical integration program. We want you to consult. You'd help design curriculum for extreme condition resuscitation. Sarah's mind raced. The thought of sharing the technique again, of legitimizing it, stirred something between hope and fear. And if I refuse? There was a pause. Then someone else will try without you, and they might not understand what it costs. He hung up before she could answer. Sarah sat in silence for a long time, the phone still pressed to her ear. She thought about Marcus Chen's heartbeat returning beneath her palms, about Alina's stillness, about every name she'd whispered under her breath in a war zone. Responsibility, that was the word that finally anchored her. Later that day, she met Jake for lunch outside the hospital cafeteria. The smell of disinfectant mixed with burnt fries, the universal perfume of medical work. He noticed the look on her face immediately. What happened? He asked. The duty called, she said. He blinked. The actual Department of Defense. Yeah, they want me to help design a training program. Disaster response, advanced field resuscitation, the same techniques. He whistled softly. You're not even done arguing with the hospital, and now the Pentagon's knocking. She smiled faintly. Story of my life. Are you going to do it? Sarah looked out the window at the endless desert horizon beyond the city. I don't know yet. Sharing it means others could save lives, but if they don't understand the risks. Jake nodded slowly. Then the miracle becomes a weapon. She glanced at him, surprised at his phrasing. Exactly. He leaned back. Maybe that's why they want you, to make sure it doesn't. She thought about that for a long moment. The hum of the cafeteria faded behind the noise in her head, memories of sirens, rotor blades, soldiers' voices. There had always been two sides to saving lives, the light of success and the shadow of failure. And maybe now, she was standing right between them. That night Sarah walked the ambulance bay again, the way she always did when she couldn't sleep. The air was cool. The city was quiet. She rested her hands against the hood of her rig and closed her eyes. She could still feel Marcus's heartbeat under her palms, faint but real. She could still feel Alina's silence. Both were lessons, opposite sides of the same truth. When the next call came over the radio, she listened, waiting. A heart attack downtown, a car crash on I-17. Somewhere, another person's life was balancing on seconds. She took the call without hesitation. Because in the end, this was what she knew. You don't wait for permission to fight for life. You just start and pray you stop in time. Why did her hands still tremble when she thought about it? Days had passed, yet Sarah still felt the phantom rhythm of Marcus Chen's heartbeat beneath her palms, a memory that wouldn't fade. It wasn't pride that made her replay that moment in her mind. It was disbelief, wonder, and fear. Because deep down, she knew what she'd done wasn't supposed to be possible. The military had taught her many things: to control her breath under fire, to stop bleeding with a piece of torn uniform, to keep a heart pumping with nothing but her will. But they hadn't taught her how to carry the moments that followed, how to walk back into the world pretending she was normal after defying its rules. Now, the world didn't want her to be normal anymore. 2 weeks after the collapse, her name had become a headline she never asked for. The paramedic who revived the dead. Miracle or myth? What does she know that doctors don't? Each headline was a distortion, turning a night of chaos and loss into a story the public could swallow. The truth was too complicated for the evening news, too gray for the comfort of black and white miracles. Sarah stopped reading the articles, but she couldn't stop the calls. First came the media outlets, then medical podcasts, then a government liaison from Washington who happened to be in Phoenix. The Department of Defense wanted her expertise. Civilian emergency boards wanted her testimony. Even the state governor's office sent a letter praising her heroic innovation in crisis medicine. They called it innovation. She called it desperation. The difference mattered. On her third night of trying to avoid the noise, she found herself back in the hospital garage, sitting alone on the hood of her ambulance, the desert wind brushing across her face. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain, that scent that only came before a storm. Jake found her there like he always did, 2 coffees in hand, both lukewarm by the time he reached her. "Thought you'd be here," he said, handing her one. She took it with a tired smile. "You ever feel like the world's trying to turn you into something you're not?" He laughed, "All the time, usually on Mondays." "I'm serious," she said. "I know," he replied softly, sitting beside her. "What happened today?" She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and handed him a folded envelope. The one stamped with a blue eagle and bold letters. Department of Defense, Civilian Medical Integration Division. Jake read the heading, eyebrows lifting. "So it's real. They actually want you to work with them." "Not just work. Lead," she said quietly. "They want me to help design a new emergency response curriculum, one that combines military medicine with civilian paramedic protocols. For future large-scale disasters," they said. He whistled softly. "That sounds huge." "It is," she said, "too huge." Jake looked at her carefully, "And that's bad because—" She stared into the distance where city lights flickered like restless stars. "Because they don't understand what they're asking me to share. That technique, the one I used on Marcus, it's not a clean formula. It's not just about where you press or how long you wait. It's about intuition, reading the body when it's not talking anymore, feeling something that shouldn't even be there. How do you teach that?" Jake thought for a long moment. "Maybe you don't. Maybe you just guide the ones who can learn it." Sarah shook her head slowly. "It's not just that. There's a cost. Every time you try it and fail, it changes you. It makes you question whether you brought someone back because you could or because you couldn't let go." The words hung in the night air. Jake didn't respond because there wasn't an answer to that. Far across the lot, the faint hum of another ambulance grew louder, pulling in from a late call. Its headlights swept across the two of them, carving their shadows onto the wall behind them like ghosts from another life. Sarah set her coffee aside. "You ever think about how easy it is to cross the line between saving someone and playing God?" Jake looked at her. "You didn't play God, you gave him a chance." "Same difference," she whispered. That night she didn't sleep. The city outside her apartment window glowed gold and restless, the noise of life too loud to ignore. She sat at her small kitchen table with a stack of reports she hadn't yet filled out, official documents describing Marcus Chen's resuscitation event. Each line was supposed to be factual, clinical. But how do you write down something you don't fully understand yourself? She picked up her pen, wrote, "Resuscitation initiated after 12 minutes, no pulse. Non-standard protocol applied. Patient recovered spontaneous circulation after 19 minutes. She stopped there, staring at the words until they blurred. The report looked sterile, stripped of everything that mattered. The moment of hesitation, the silence before the heartbeat, the raw defiance that had made her keep going when everyone said stop. How do you document instinct? Her phone buzzed. A new text. Meeting scheduled, Phoenix General Conference Room 2A, 900 hours. DoD Medical Integration Division. Sarah sighed. It was happening whether she was ready or not. The next morning she walked into the conference room in her pressed uniform, hair tied back, face calm but guarded. Inside were 3 people. Dr. Walsh, representing the hospital, a man in a gray suit from the Department of Defense, and a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Colonel Marie Anders, Medical Liaison, Advanced Trauma Programs. Anders' handshake was firm, her gaze sharp. "Sergeant Martinez," she said. Sarah blinked. It had been years since anyone used that title. "It's paramedic now." "Once military, always military," Anders said with a small smile. "We've been following your work. Impressive." Sarah sat. "Work implies it was intentional." Walsh intervened. "We're all aware of the extraordinary outcome, Colonel. The question is how to proceed responsibly." "Responsibly," Anders repeated, leaning forward. "Exactly. That's why we're here. Sergeant Martinez has field experience with resuscitation under combat conditions that exceeds current civilian standards. We believe she could help us train others to operate at that level." Sarah's voice was calm, but there was a flicker of unease behind it. "The last time I taught that technique, someone didn't make it." Anders nodded. "I read the reports. That's precisely why your experience matters. You understand both success and failure. That's rare." The man in the suit, Dr. Fields, she learned, tapped a pen against the table. "We don't want to turn this into mythology. We want data, procedures, something that can be replicated." Sarah gave a short, humorless laugh. "You can't replicate what's half instinct." Walsh looked at her. "But you can protect it from being misused." That silenced Sarah for a moment. Colonel Anders spoke softly. "You're not the only one with this knowledge, Martinez. Parts of that training program you were in, Operation Phoenix Shield, have resurfaced. Some of the old files have leaked. Civilians are trying to reverse engineer what they don't understand." Sarah's stomach turned cold. "Leaked?" "Yes. Online forums, private contractors, even rogue instructors claiming to teach battlefield resuscitation. None of them are qualified. If this continues, someone's going to get killed." Sarah leaned back slowly, realization hitting her like a delayed explosion. The thing she'd tried to bury, the secret she thought she could keep locked behind duty and silence, was already out there, being twisted into something dangerous. Anders met her eyes. "That's why we need you, to make sure it's done right." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She looked at Walsh, who gave a small nod, eyes full of unspoken understanding. "Think of it this way," Anders continued. "You could either let others guess at your methods and cause harm, or you could help us build something that saves lives." There it was, the moral pivot she'd been running from. Silence filled the room. The hum of the air conditioner became the only sound. Finally, Sarah spoke. "If I say yes, it has to be on my terms. Full ethical review, psychological screening for anyone learning it. No shortcuts, no performance quotas." Anders smiled faintly. "You drive a hard bargain." Sarah's voice hardened. "Because I know what happens when people forget that the line between saving and breaking is razor thin." Anders nodded once, agreed. When the meeting ended, Sarah stepped into the sunlight outside the hospital. It was almost noon, the desert heat shimmering off the pavement. She stood there for a long time, the world moving around her, sirens, horns, voices. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. Jake found her later by the ambulance bay. "So, what's the verdict?" She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think I just signed up to teach the thing I swore I'd never use again." He grinned. "That sounds about right." But she didn't laugh. She looked out at the city, her voice quieter now. "You know what scares me the most?" "What?" "That it might work. And if it works, what happens when the wrong people start using it for the wrong reasons?" Jake frowned. "You think that's possible?" "I've seen what desperation does to people," she said softly. "Sometimes they don't want to save a life. They just don't want to lose one." The sun was beginning to set, that burnt-orange glow that turned Phoenix into a painting of heat and dust. Sarah watched it, her hands resting on the ambulance door. In that moment, she understood something her old instructor once told her in Afghanistan. Every technique has a purpose. Every life you bring back will teach you something. The real question is whether you're strong enough to carry what it teaches. Now she finally understood what he meant. Some knowledge saves lives. Some knowledge saves souls. And some knowledge, if you're not careful, destroys both. The wind shifted. A faint storm cloud rolled over the horizon. Sarah turned toward it, whispering under her breath, "Let's hope I can tell the difference. What if the thing that saves lives also destroys the people who use it?" That thought haunted Sarah from the moment she stepped through the gates of the new training facility, a converted Air Force medical base just outside Tucson, its walls bleached pale by years of desert sun. The place smelled of steel, sand, and faint antiseptic, like a memory of every field hospital she'd ever worked in. The Department of Defense had spared no expense. Rows of advanced simulators filled the hangars, built to replicate the chaos of disaster zones, earthquake rubble, battlefield wreckage, even mock civilian collapse sites complete with smoke and sound. They called it Project Resilience. But Sarah knew better. It was Phoenix Shield reborn, the ghost of her past, resurrected under a new name. Paramedic Martinez. The voice came from behind her. Colonel Marie Anders approached, clipboard in hand, the desert wind tugging at her ponytail. "Welcome to the program," she said. "You'll be heading Alpha Cohort. 12 recruits, mixed backgrounds, paramedics, combat medics, trauma nurses, all hand-picked." Sarah followed her into the training bay, the rhythmic thrum of machinery echoing off metal walls. 12 trainees stood in a semicircle, watching her with a mix of awe and tension. Some looked like they'd been waiting their entire careers for a chance like this. Others looked like they already regretted volunteering. Anders gestured toward the group. "They've all read the reports about you. Some of them still think you performed a miracle. I told them it was a technique." Sarah smiled faintly. "You told them half the truth." Anders nodded. "That's your job, to teach them the rest." She left Sarah standing alone before the recruits. Silence stretched until Sarah broke it. "I'm not here to teach miracles," she said. Her voice carried through the cavernous space, sharp and steady. "I'm here to teach you how not to break when the world does. What I'm about to show you isn't magic. It's pain, precision, and responsibility. You're going to fail, maybe more than once, and that failure will stay with you. If that scares you, you're free to walk out now." No one moved. "Good," she said. "Then let's begin." The first day was chaos, organized chaos, the kind Sarah understood. She started with the basics: trauma triage under duress, simultaneous airway management and cardiac compression, advanced rhythm diagnostics without monitors. The recruits moved fast but clumsy, adrenaline outrunning their focus. By midday, 2 had nearly passed out from heat. One cried quietly after a simulation gone wrong. Sarah didn't scold her. She just handed her a water bottle and said, "Better to break here than out there." In the evenings, when the desert cooled and the lights dimmed across the compound, Sarah stayed behind. She'd walk the rows of practice mannequins, staring at their lifeless plastic faces, remembering real ones' faces from Afghanistan, from Phoenix, from every emergency that had left its mark on her hands. One night, Colonel Anders joined her. She stood beside Sarah in silence for a while before saying, "You don't look like someone leading a groundbreaking medical program." Sarah didn't look up. "Because I'm not. I'm leading a reminder. A reminder that every miracle costs something." Anders studied her profile in the low light. "You think teaching this is wrong?" Sarah hesitated. "Not wrong, necessary, but necessity doesn't make it clean." Anders nodded slowly. "We all carry ghosts in this line of work. The trick is making sure they walk behind you, not ahead." Sarah almost smiled. "That's good advice. I'll pretend it's possible." By the third week, the trainees had learned the mechanical aspects of the resuscitation technique: pressure sequences, rhythm phases, neural triggers. But the real test wasn't precision. It was control. Sarah gathered them in the simulation ward and dimmed the lights. "Today," she said, "we stop treating this like procedure. Today, you learn to listen. She stepped up to the training dummy, its chest rigged with sensors that mimicked the absence of life. The screen behind it showed flatline. Everyone knows CPR. Everyone knows defibrillation. But what I'm about to show you, it's the moment after both have failed. The point where logic tells you to stop. That's when instinct takes over. She placed her hands on the dummy's chest, the way she had with Marcus Chen. "You find the silence beneath your palms," she said softly. "You feel for the echoes in the tissue. The body tells you when there's still something left. You just have to listen hard enough." The trainees watched in reverent silence. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost musical, a rhythm that belonged more to intuition than science. The monitor flickered, showing faint waves, programmed responses, but the lesson wasn't the machine. It was the look in her eyes. She stepped back. "Now it's your turn." The first recruit stepped forward, trembling slightly. His hands shook as he tried to mimic her pattern. The monitor stayed flat. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're pressing," she said, "not listening." He nodded, frustrated. "I don't know how to listen to something that's not there." "That's the point," she said. "It's not gone, it's just quiet." Hours passed. Sweat, tension, silence. By the end of the session, only 2 recruits had managed to replicate even a fraction of the electrical feedback response. But Sarah wasn't disappointed. She'd expected that. Later in the mess hall, she watched them eat in exhausted silence. No one laughed. No one bragged. They looked hollow, the way she used to look after field shifts that lasted through sunrise. Jake called that night. He stayed in Phoenix, running local EMS. "So, how's your miracle school?" Sarah laughed quietly. "Less miracle, more exhaustion." "You think they're getting it?" "Some of them. The rest are realizing this isn't about heroics. It's about patience, control, and knowing when to stop." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like you're starting to believe in what you're doing." She didn't answer immediately. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I just don't have the luxury of doubt anymore." After the call, she sat outside her quarters under the desert stars. The wind was cool, the silence deep enough to hear her own heartbeat. Somewhere far off, coyotes howled, the kind of sound that made the world feel both ancient and fragile. She thought about Marcus Chen again, his eyes opening, his whisper, "Why?" She'd given him life but not answers. Maybe this teaching others was her answer now. Week 6 brought the first live test. Not a human, but a military-grade biometric dummy, one designed to simulate full physiological shutdown with random patterns of cardiac failure. The trainees took turns. Each had 10 minutes to attempt revival using the Martinez protocol, as the duty had started calling it. The first attempt failed. So did the second. The third ended with a trainee breaking rhythm in frustration, shouting, "It's impossible," before storming out. Sarah stopped him at the door. "You think I didn't say the same thing once?" He turned, face flushed. "Then how do you keep believing it works?" She held his gaze. "Because I've seen what happens when you stop believing." He didn't respond, just nodded and walked back to try again. By late afternoon, the 11th trainee, a quiet medic named Alana Ruiz, stepped up. She was steady, calm. Her hands moved with something that almost resembled grace. After 5 minutes, the monitor flickered faint, unstable electrical waves. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "That's it," she said quietly. "Stay there, don't rush it." The waves strengthened, then steadied. The room erupted into applause. Alana looked up dazed. "Did I just—" Sarah smiled. "You listened." Later, when the others had left, Sarah found herself alone in the training room again. The silence after their excitement felt heavy. She looked at the monitor's lingering green line, the simulated heartbeat pulsing like a quiet echo of her past. She should have felt proud, but what she felt instead was fear. Because if a trainee could do it after 6 weeks, The line between control and chaos had just become thinner. Colonel Anders found her still there long after lights out. "You did it," she said. "You proved it can be taught." Sarah turned, her expression unreadable. "Or I proved it can be repeated. That's not the same thing." Anders studied her. "You think you've opened Pandora's box?" Sarah exhaled slowly. "I think I just gave the world a match and told it where to find oxygen." Anders smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed hard. "Then make sure they don't burn themselves." The following morning, Sarah woke before dawn. She stood at her mirror, uniform crisp, badge shining faintly in the pale light. But what stared back at her didn't look like the woman from Phoenix anymore. Her eyes were older, sharper. There was resolve there and something else. Acceptance, maybe, or resignation. As she walked across the compound, the desert wind carried the faint hum of machinery and voices preparing for another day. The recruits greeted her with newfound confidence. They'd tasted success. They wanted more. Sarah watched them, pride and worry tangled inside her chest. Once she had been them, young, eager, certain that saving lives was the purest kind of victory. Now she knew better. Saving one person often meant losing a piece of yourself. But she also knew this. In a world that gave up too easily, teaching people to try one more time was worth every scar it left behind. When the sun finally rose over the desert, painting the sky in red and gold, Sarah looked out across the base and whispered to herself, not as a medic, not as a soldier, but as someone who'd stood at the edge of life and refused to step back. "Let's hope we remember why we started." How do you prepare someone for the moment they'll question everything they believe about life and death? That question echoed through Sarah's mind long before the alarm sounded. It was late afternoon in the Arizona desert, sunlight spilling over the training compound in molten gold. The recruits had finished their drills for the day, exhaustion hanging over them like heat haze. The air smelled of sweat, sand, and faint antiseptic, familiar, grounding. Sarah was walking the perimeter alone, the way she did when she needed silence to think. She just reached the edge of the motor pool when the siren wailed. Not a drill siren, the real one. Her radio crackled. "All medical instructors report to command center. We've got a situation, mass casualty event, Tucson outskirts. Civilian freight train derailment, multiple criticals, local EMS overwhelmed, military support requested." For a second, the desert went still. Then everything moved at once. Sarah sprinted toward the command post, boots kicking up dust. Inside, Colonel Anders was already surrounded by staff officers, screens flashing satellite feeds and emergency reports. Anders looked up the moment Sarah entered. "We're deploying Alpha Cohort," she said, her tone clipped. "You're leading them." Sarah froze. "They're not ready." "They're as ready as anyone ever is," Anders replied. "Local hospitals are at capacity. Civilian response is collapsing. This is exactly why this program exists." Sarah glanced at the feed, overturned rail cars, smoke, bodies scattered across the dirt. The scale was staggering. How many injured? 70 confirmed, 23 critical, multiple cardiac arrests en route. Sarah swallowed hard. "And you want my trainees to do what you taught them," Anders said, "or we'll lose everyone." There was no time left to argue. They deployed in armored ambulances, 6 vehicles packed with supplies and adrenaline. The drive into Tucson took less than an hour, but the silence inside felt endless. The recruits sat strapped in, pale under their helmets, trying to steady their breathing. Sarah rode up front beside Jake, who joined the mission as a liaison from Phoenix EMS. He shot her a glance. "Guess the classroom, over." She nodded grimly. "It always ends like this." When they arrived, the scene was pure chaos. Smoke billowed from the twisted remains of the freight train. Emergency lights painted everything in strobes of red and white. Civilians were screaming, trapped between mangled cars. Firefighters and medics moved like ants in organized panic. Sarah stepped out, heat slamming into her face. The ground vibrated under her boots from the engines of rescue machinery. Her instincts took over before her thoughts caught up. Team 1, triage near the south railcar. Team 2, stabilization and extraction. Team 3 with me. Her voice carried authority. Fear receded. Movement replaced hesitation. Minutes blurred. Shouts, sirens, the metallic smell of blood and diesel. Sarah moved from one patient to another, issuing orders, her hands already slick with sweat and grime. Then she heard it, a paramedic shouting over the noise. "No pulse. He's been down 9 minutes." Sarah turned. A young man lay sprawled near a collapsed carriage, chest crushed beneath metal debris. One of her trainees, Alana Ruiz, knelt beside him, hands poised but uncertain. Sarah ran over. "Status." "Blunt trauma to the chest," Alana said, voice trembling. "No respiration, CPR unsuccessful, no defib response." Sarah looked at the monitor. Flatline. The others around them hesitated, waiting for her call. And in that moment, she saw the question in Alana's eyes, the same question Sarah had asked herself in Phoenix. Do we keep trying? Sarah didn't answer right away. The world seemed to narrow around her, the noise fatting, time slowing. This was it, the test she'd been dreading. She knelt beside Alana. "You know what to do." Alana hesitated. "What if I mess up?" "You will," Sarah said softly. "Everyone does. The trick is not stopping when you do." Alana nodded once, swallowed her fear, and placed her hands. Sarah watched every movement, the pressure, the timing, the rhythm. Alana's breathing steadied. Her focus sharpened. Around them, chaos roared, but inside that small circle of dust and sweat, the world became impossibly quiet. 5 minutes passed, nothing. Then a flicker on the monitor. Alana gasped. "Wait there, electrical activity." Sarah leaned closer, her chest tight. "Stay with it, guide it." Another flicker, then another. The line steadied, rising and falling. The young man's chest twitched, his fingers moved. And just like that, he breathed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the rescue workers around them burst into cheers. Even the firefighters stopped to stare. Alana sat back, tears streaking the dirt on her face. "I did it," she whispered. "He's alive." Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said gently. "You kept him alive, there's a difference." They loaded the patient into an ambulance, his vitals still unstable but present. As the doors shut, Sarah turned away, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. It had worked again. Not from her hands this time, but from someone she'd taught. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt the weight double. Hours later, the chaos subsided into exhaustion. The last patients were airlifted. The fires were out. The site was quiet except for the low hum of generators and the steady rhythm of triage monitors. Sarah sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, her uniform streaked with ash. The recruits were scattered nearby, silent, hollow-eyed. Colonel Anders approached, dirt streaking her own face. 14 resuscitations attempted, she said. 9 successful. That's more than we've ever seen in a field event. Sarah stared out at the wreckage. And 5 we lost. Anders nodded slowly. You can't save everyone. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Tell that to the ones who will never stop trying. Anders studied her for a moment, then said quietly, You did what you came here to do. You proved it works. Sarah turned her head slightly. Did I? Or did I just prove how close we can get to failure before we call it victory? Anders didn't answer. She just placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, firm, grounding. You gave them hope. Don't underestimate that. When the colonel walked away, Jake came over, sitting beside her. He looked as tired as she felt. Your students, he said, they were incredible. Sarah nodded. They were brave. He looked at her. You okay? She didn't respond right away. Do you remember what I told you about the cost of using this technique? Jake frowned. Yeah. It's not just the emotional toll, she said quietly. It's what happens after. Once you've brought someone back, you start to wonder what right you had to do it. You see their faces in your sleep. You start asking yourself if you saved them because they could live or because you couldn't accept losing them. Jake was silent for a moment. So what's the answer? She looked down at her hands, scarred and shaking slightly. There isn't one. You just keep doing the work and hope the scales balance someday. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's the point. You're not supposed to find balance. You're supposed to keep trying anyway. Sarah managed a tired smile. You always did have a talent for turning pain into poetry. Occupational hazard, he said with a faint grin. By the time they returned to base, dawn was breaking. The desert stretched endless and quiet, painted gold by the rising sun. The trainees filed off the vehicles one by one, limping, dirty, but alive. Alana approached Sarah, her voice small but steady. Ma'am, when he came back, when I felt the heartbeat, I thought it would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt heavy. Sarah nodded slowly. That's how you know it's real. Alana hesitated. How do you live with that? Sarah looked out at the horizon where the light broke clean over the sand. You don't, she said softly. You just carry it. Later that morning, during the debriefing, Colonel Anders addressed the team. Project Resilience has officially proven effective under live conditions. The Department of Defense will be expanding the program. Civilian emergency agencies have already expressed interest. There was applause, restrained but proud. Sarah didn't clap. She stared at the map on the wall, red dots marking every place where future trainees would be sent. Hospitals, fire departments, disaster zones. The ripple had begun. After the briefing, Dr. Walsh appeared on a video call from Phoenix. Her expression was serious but kind. I saw the field reports, she said. Congratulations. What you've built is going to save countless lives. Sarah smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe it's going to test a lot of souls. Walsh studied her. You knew this moment would come, the point where what you started becomes bigger than you. That's what scares me, Sarah admitted. Walsh leaned forward, her tone gentle. You can't control how the world uses what you've given it. You can only make sure it remembers the heart behind it. Sarah nodded, and if it does, then make sure you don't forget. The call ended. The screen went dark. Sarah sat there for a long time, the silence pressing around her. She thought of Marcus Chen again, alive, smiling, sending her photos of his daughters every month. She thought of Elena Vasquez, whose name she still whispered on sleepless nights. And now, she thought of Alana, the student who'd crossed the line she'd once stood on and felt the same weight settle in her chest. Maybe that was how legacy really worked. Not in glory or recognition, but in the quiet transfer of burden, one pair of hands to another. As night fell again over the desert, Sarah walked the empty training ground. The sand was cool under her boots, the sky scattered with stars. She knelt down, pressing her palms into the earth, feeling the pulse of heat still trapped below. For a long time, she stayed like that, listening to the silence, as if somewhere beneath it she could hear the faint echo of every heartbeat she'd ever fought for. When she finally stood, she whispered into the wind, "Stay alive." Maybe she was speaking to the world. Maybe she was speaking to herself. How do you stay invisible when the world suddenly wants to see you? For Sarah, anonymity had always been armor, the thin veil that let her keep moving after every mission, every loss. But after Tucson, that armor shattered. It began with one leaked video. A firefighter's helmet cam, uploaded anonymously, capturing Alana Ruiz performing the technique, Sarah's technique, under the choking smoke of the wreckage. The footage went viral within hours. The caption read, "She brought him back. He was gone and she brought him back." By morning, the clip had been played across every major network. The commentators called it a medical miracle, the dawn of a new frontier, proof that death isn't final. By the second day, Sarah's face was on screens she hadn't even known existed. They called her the woman who defied death. Inside the training compound, the mood had shifted. Cameras lined the perimeter. Journalists camped outside the gates. The recruits, once a quiet, focused team, now moved like people walking through someone else's dream. Alana tried to avoid the attention, but her photo had already gone global. Her hands, the ones that had pressed life back into a stranger, had become a symbol. People were sending her letters, asking her to save their loved ones. Some even called her an angel. Sarah hated it. She stood in Colonel Anders' office as yet another news report played faintly from the mounted screen. A smiling anchor read the headline, "From Combat Medicine to Miracles, the secret project changing emergency response forever." "Turn that off," Sarah said quietly. Anders muted it, folding her arms. "You knew this was going to happen eventually." "I knew it could happen," Sarah corrected. "I didn't think it would happen like this. They're treating it like resurrection, not medicine." Anders leaned against the desk. "You can't stop people from seeing what they want to see." "I can stop them from using it wrong." Anders sighed. "The technique's already out, Sarah. Command's greenlit the civilian rollout. Hospitals in 3 states are requesting training. You can't keep this contained anymore." Sarah stared at the muted screen, Alana's trembling hands, her own face beside the word miracle. "It wasn't supposed to be this," she whispered. "It was supposed to be rare, something sacred, not a tool." Anders' tone softened. "You gave the world a gift. Don't punish yourself because it can't hold it carefully." Sarah almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Maybe I didn't give them a gift. Maybe I gave them temptation." The following week, she was ordered to appear before the press, a simple statement, Command had called it. "You'll reassure the public, talk about responsibility, ethics, science." But when she stepped onto the stage, the flash of cameras hit her like gunfire. A wall of noise, reporters shouting her name, throwing questions that sounded more like accusations. "Captain Martinez, do you believe death can now be reversed? Is it true you've revived people who were clinically dead? Do you think this discovery belongs to the government or to humanity?" Her throat tightened. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. Then she leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was low, steady, but laced with exhaustion. "This isn't resurrection," she said. "It's medicine, hard, painful, imperfect medicine. It doesn't save everyone. It shouldn't. What we do isn't about defying death. It's about refusing to give up before we understand what life still has left to give." The room quieted. For a heartbeat, she thought she might have reached them. Then another voice called out, sharp and cutting. "If you could bring someone back, Captain, anyone, would you?" Sarah froze. Every memory she'd buried rose at once. Marcus Chen, gasping for breath. Elena Vasquez, gone before she arrived. The countless faces she hadn't been able to save. She looked straight into the crowd and said, almost to herself, "No, I'd bring peace instead." Silence. Then the room erupted with questions, flashes, chaos. That night back in her quarters, she watched the replay alone. They'd edited her speech down to a soundbite. "I'd bring peace instead." The internet was tearing it apart, half calling her a hero, the other half calling her a coward. Jake called just after midnight. His voice was soft. "You did good out there." I didn't say what they wanted to hear. Maybe that's why it mattered. Sarah sighed. "You should see what they're saying. They think this is about power, about playing God." "People fear what reminds them they're fragile," he said. "They'll dress that fear up as criticism." "Yeah, well," she murmured, "it's working." He paused. "You ever regret doing it, saving Marcus that day?" Sarah looked at the small framed photo on her desk, Marcus with his daughters, smiling, alive. "Never," she said, "but I regret what it's turned into." Jake's voice softened. You can't control what happens after the saving. You just keep doing it anyway. After the call, she sat for a long time in the quiet. Outside, the desert wind brushed against the windows, carrying the faint hum of faraway traffic. The world she'd changed, restless and unaware of what it had lost in the process. A month later, the first misuse happened. An unauthorized clinic in Nevada claimed to offer the Martinez revival method for paying clients. They'd extracted fragments of leaked training manuals, mixed it with pseudoscience, and sold hope to desperate families. 3 patients died under their care. The headlines hit like shrapnel. Sarah read the report in silence. Anders stood across from her, grim. They're calling for an ethics review, Anders said. They want you to appear before the Congressional Medical Oversight Committee. Sarah didn't move. They're not going to ask me questions about ethics, she said. They're going to ask who's to blame. Anders nodded. They'll expect you to defend the project. I'm not sure I can. Anders exhaled slowly. Sarah, you didn't build this to harm anyone. You built it to give people a chance. Sarah's eyes hardened. I built it because I couldn't live with one more loss. That's not the same thing. The hearing took place in Washington, inside a room that smelled of polished wood and politics. Rows of reporters filled the back. The committee members' faces carved from granite watched her with detached curiosity. A senator leaned forward. Captain Martinez, he began, your medical innovation has been hailed as revolutionary, but with 3 civilian deaths linked to unregulated use, many believe this method was released too soon. What do you say to that? Sarah met his gaze. It was never meant to be released at all. A murmur rippled through the room. The senator frowned. You mean the government acted without your approval? I mean, she said quietly, that no one should have had the authority to decide who gets to play with the line between life and death. Another member, a woman in a crisp gray suit, interjected. Are you saying you regret your discovery? Sarah's voice faltered for just a moment. I don't regret saving lives. I regret making people believe they could do it without consequence. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Cameras clicked, pens scratched. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered, she's done. But Sarah didn't care. For the first time in months, her words felt clean, unpolished, unguarded, honest. After the hearing, she walked alone down Constitution Avenue. The air smelled like rain, the sky hanging low and gray. Reporters followed at a distance, but she ignored them. Her phone buzzed endlessly, offers for interviews, endorsements, podcasts. She turned it off. She didn't want to be heard. She wanted to be quiet again. That evening, she went to a small diner near the river. It was almost empty, just a few truckers and a waitress humming to herself. Sarah ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching the reflection of the city lights ripple across the Potomac. For the first time in a long time, she let herself feel the exhaustion she'd been running from, the kind that didn't come from work, but from being seen. Jake found her there an hour later. He slid into the booth across from her without a word. How'd you find me? She asked. Habit, he said with a faint smile. You always hide near water. She huffed a small laugh. Guess I'm not that hard to read. He studied her quietly. You look tired. I am. He nodded. You did what you could, that's enough. She looked down at her hands, the same hands the world had turned into symbols. It'll never be enough, she whispered. Because for every life we save, someone else thinks they can do it too. And maybe they can, but not everyone will understand what it costs. Jake was quiet for a moment. So what now? I don't know, she said. Maybe I step back, let someone else carry it forward. Maybe it's time the world learned to handle itself without me. He tilted his head. You really think you can walk away? Sarah smiled sadly. No, but I can try. The next morning she drove out of the city before sunrise. No escort, no cameras, no headlines. just the hum of the engine and the stretch of highway leading west. Somewhere past the state line, she pulled over at a rest stop and stood outside, breathing the cool dawn air. The horizon was pale pink, soft and endless. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was running. She just felt still. She took out her notebook, the one she'd used to record the first notes of the technique, and wrote one line across the last blank page. "If the world forgets why we saved them, I'll remember for all of us." Then she closed it. Back at the compound, Alana found the note Sarah left behind on her desk. No goodbye, no instructions, just the notebook and her badge placed neatly on top. Alana held it to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. Outside, the wind swept across the desert training field, carrying the faint echo of a woman's voice, steady, strong, and unafraid. "Keep listening. Where do heroes go when the world no longer needs them, or worse, when it no longer understands them?" Months passed. The desert compound emptied, refitted for the next phase of Project Resilience. Reporters came and went. Politicians took credit, corporations filed patents, and Sarah Martinez became a name whispered in documentaries and medical schools, always with reverence, always with distance. But Sarah herself was gone. No one knew where. Some said she was working abroad under a different name, training medics in war zones. Others claimed she'd retreated to the mountains, teaching only those willing to find her. A few even believed she died quietly somewhere far away, her heart finally too tired to keep up with the world she'd revived. But Alana Ruiz knew better. Because every few weeks a letter would arrive, no return address, no name, just the same handwriting. Inside, a single line, sometimes a question, sometimes advice. The first one had said, "Don't let them turn it into routine." The second, "You'll know when to stop trying and when not to." And once, just one word, "Listen." It was late autumn when the next test came. A massive earthquake struck the Pacific coast, toppling bridges, splitting highways, leaving hundreds trapped. Alana, now a senior instructor, was leading a mobile response team when the call came in. A collapsed hospital, multiple casualties, unstable structure. By the time they arrived, the air was thick with dust and smoke. Cries echoed through the rubble. Emergency lights flashed weakly through the haze. Alana's hands trembled as she strapped on her gloves. This was her first mission without Sarah's voice guiding her in her ear, but in the noise, she thought she could still hear it anyway. She found the first victim pinned under concrete, a young nurse, pale and still. No pulse. She began compressions, her team working fast to clear debris. But the monitor stayed flat. Someone shouted, "She's gone." Alana froze. Her eyes burned from the dust, or maybe from something else. Then she remembered the words, "Don't let them turn it into routine." She placed her hands again, slower this time, listening. The world around her disappeared, the sirens, the shouting, the chaos. There was only the faint echo beneath her palms, the silence that wasn't quite silence. She moved with focus born from memory, from faith, from every lesson Sarah had carved into her soul. Minutes passed, then a faint spike. "Wait," she whispered, "there, I've got something." The others leaned in, disbelief flickering into awe. The spike grew. The nurse gasped weakly, eyes fluttering open. "She's back," Alana said softly, tears cutting through the grime on her face. "She's back." That night, after the mission ended, Alana sat alone on the edge of the field hospital tent. The stars above the ruined city were muted by dust, but one shone brighter, a steady point of light that refused to fade. She took out her last unopened letter. The paper was worn, edges frayed from being carried too long. She promised herself she'd only read it when she truly needed it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. There were just 3 lines. "When the world forgets to care, remember that you don't need permission to try again. Some lives will thank you, some won't. Do it anyway." Alana read it 3 times before tucking it back into her vest pocket. She didn't realize she was smiling until one of her medics approached. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Command wants your report." She nodded. "Tell them I'll send it soon." The medic hesitated. "Can I ask something? That technique, where did it really come from?" Alana looked toward the horizon, where faint light shimmered over the wreckage. "From someone who couldn't stop trying," she said, "even when everyone else did." Months later, in a remote border village ravaged by monsoon floods, a local rescue worker looked up as a woman arrived in a dusty jeep. Her hair was streaked with gray, her uniform plain, no insignia. She carried no credentials, only a battered medic's bag. "Are you the one they call Dr. Sarah?" the villager asked cautiously. The woman smiled faintly. "Not anymore, just a helper." He led her into the flooded field hospital, dozens injured, waterlogged supplies, barely enough light to see. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees beside a patient and began to work. Her hands moved with calm precision, her voice steady and low. No one recognized her, but the rhythm of her touch, the focus in her eyes, it carried something familiar, something quietly legendary. Hours passed, night deepened, and when she finally stepped outside to wash the blood and mud from her arms, the villager offered her a towel. "You've done this before," he said. Sarah looked out at the jungle, where rain still whispered through the trees. "More times than I should have," she replied softly. "Then why keep doing it?" She smiled, small, tired, unbreakable, "Because someone has to." Back in the States, Project Resilience expanded quietly. The technique was now taught in controlled environments, guarded by strict ethics, monitored under Sarah's original notes. But those who practiced it never called it by its official name. Among medics, it had a different title. They called it the listen method. It wasn't about defying death. It was about defying indifference, about staying when everyone else walked away. And every time a life flickered back to light under trembling hands, someone somewhere whispered the same words Sarah had once spoken, words that had become almost sacred. "Don't press, listen." Years later, Alana was invited to speak at a global medical summit in Geneva. She stood behind the same kind of podium Sarah once had, the world watching, waiting. Cameras, flashes, expectation. Her palms were sweating, her throat dry. She remembered Sarah's first press conference, the trembling voice, the weight of misunderstanding. But this time she knew what to say. She began simply. "There's a story we tell in medicine about the line between life and death. But we've spent so much time staring at that line that we've forgotten what's on either side." She paused. "The listen method isn't about crossing that line. It's about standing beside someone who's already crossed and refusing to leave them alone. It's about patience, not power." The hall was silent, hundreds of faces still, some emotional, some skeptical. She took a deep breath. "And if you remember nothing else, remember this. The act of saving someone is not just physical, it's a promise to see them, to fight for them, even when the world says it's time to stop." Her voice wavered slightly on that last word, stop. She thought of Sarah then, somewhere out there, unseen but not gone. She stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding. And though there was a pause before the applause came, when it did, it sounded less like celebration and more like understanding. In the quiet after the summit, Alana walked through the old streets of Geneva. The air smelled of rain, the cobblestones slick underfoot. She stopped at a bridge overlooking the dark water, her reflection rippling with every drop that fell. A faint sound drew her attention, someone speaking behind her softly, almost lost in the wind. "Still listening?" Alana froze. Slowly she turned. There, standing beneath the lamplight, was a woman with tired eyes and a half-smile. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her face lined but unmistakable. "Sarah." The older woman nodded once. "You did well." Tears welled up instantly, years of words she'd wanted to say collapsing into silence. You disappeared. I had to, Sarah said. The work had to live without me. Alana shook her head. You changed everything. Sarah's eyes softened. No, we did. They stood there, the river murmuring beneath them, city lights reflecting like fallen stars. After a while, Alana said quietly, they still call it your method. Sarah smiled faintly. Then they've already forgotten what matters. It was never mine. What was it then? Sarah looked out at the river, her voice barely above a whisper. A reminder that life doesn't always end where we think it does, and that sometimes the only thing stronger than death is not giving up. The wind caught her words and carried them across the water. When Alana turned again, she was gone. Only the empty bridge, the sound of rain, and the faintest echo of a heartbeat in the night. Months later, in a small mountain clinic far from any map, a child's heart stopped. The doctor on duty froze, too far from any hospital, too little equipment. But an older woman standing quietly by the window stepped forward. Let me, she said. Her hands found the child's chest, calm, gentle, listening. And as snow fell outside, she whispered, not to the child, not to the storm, but to the memory of every life that had come before. Come back just once more. Moments later, the child gasped, the monitors beeped, life returned. The woman smiled softly and looked up at the nurse standing frozen beside her. Write it down, she said, it's possible. The nurse blinked through tears. What should I call it? The woman thought for a moment, then said quietly, hope. And with that, Sarah Martinez, the woman who once defied death, walked out into the snow, leaving only footprints that the wind would soon erase. But the echo remained in every medic's heartbeat, in every whispered prayer, in every act of quiet defiance when the world said stop. Because in the end, she was never trying to defeat death. She was teaching the world how to honor life. And somewhere beyond sound, beyond words, beyond the reach of monitors or machines, a voice still whispered softly, steady as ever. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.